Every Sunday morning for nearly 2 years, 19-year-old Elena Moreno walked 3 miles from the laundromat where she slept in the back storage room to the Fairview Rose assisted living facility carrying nothing but a small canvas bag with 3 combs, a spray bottle of water, and a jar of coconut oil she refilled from a bigger jar at the dollar store because she could not afford the salon kind. She went there to braid the hair of a woman named Margaret Whitfield, a woman in room 214 who had not received a visitor in 11 years and who, on the first Sunday Elena walked into her room by mistake looking for the cleaning supply closet, had looked up at her from the bed with a face so full of the particular loneliness of being forgotten that Elena had simply set down her bag, pulled a chair to the side of that bed, and said, "Would it be all right if I did something with your hair?" She had been doing it every Sunday since, and she had never, not once, asked Margaret Whitfield a single question about who she was or what she had been or why in a facility full of residents with photographs on their nightstands and children who called on weekends. She was the only woman on the entire second floor who sat through every single visiting hour completely alone. Before we begin, this is a fictional story written to inspire and uplift. At Silver & Kind, we believe that one quiet act of kindness, offered to someone the world has forgotten, can set loose a chain of events no one ever sees coming. If that belief speaks to you, settle in. This story is for you. Elena Moreno was 19 years old and had been on her own since she was 16. Her mother had died of pneumonia 3 years earlier in a small apartment on the east side of a city that did not particularly notice when people like her mother died, and her father, who had left when Elena was 4, was a phone number that had stopped working a long time ago. She had aged out of every support system that existed for children who lost parents. Not because the systems were cruel but because they were built for children younger than 16. And by the time 16 arrived and her mother was gone and there was no one left to take her in, the systems had done what systems do and quietly moved on to the next child. Elena had gone to work at a laundromat called Suds and Such owned by a woman named Mrs. Alma Reyes, who was 63 years old and had lost her own daughter to cancer 8 years before Elena walked through her door with a resume written on notebook paper and eyes that Mrs. Reyes recognized immediately as the eyes of someone who had nowhere else to go. Mrs. Reyes had given her a job folding sheets and running the commercial dryers, and when she had realized a month later that Elena had been sleeping on the bus bench across the street, she had simply handed her a key to the back storage room and said, "There's a cot in there that belonged to my husband. You sleep on that now. We don't discuss it again." That was how Elena had come to live in a storage room behind a laundromat, surrounded by shelves of detergent and dryer sheets and a water heater that clanked all night, making a home for herself out of things nobody else wanted. She had a small lamp. She had a milk crate she used as a nightstand. She had a picture of her mother taped to the wall beside the cot, a small photograph from a better year, her mother's hair pulled back in a thick braid Elena had done herself. And on the mornings when Elena woke up before dawn and could not quite remember how she had gotten here, she would look at that picture and remember her mother's hands guiding her own hands through the 3 strands of the braid when she was 7 years old, and her mother's voice saying, "Like this, Mija. Gentle. Hair remembers how you touched it." Those words had stayed with her. They had become, over the years, a kind of quiet religion. Hair remembers how you touched it. She believed it the way some people believed in other things. Elena had started braiding hair for money when she was 14, sitting on the front steps of the apartment building doing the hair of the girls in her neighborhood for $5 a head. And by the time she was 16, she was good enough that women would stop her on the street and ask where she had learned. She had not learned anywhere. She had just listened to what her mother told her when she was 7 and taken it seriously. Now she was 19 and still doing hair when people asked, charging what they could afford, never less than $10 and never more than $20 because she did not believe hair should be expensive. And she worked 4 to 5 hours a week at the laundromat for a wage that covered food and her phone and a small bank account she was building dollar by dollar toward a cosmetology license she was 27 months away from being able to afford. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. She had started going to Fairview Rose on Sunday mornings for what Mrs. Reyes called her practice hours. Elena volunteered in the activity room every Sunday from 10 to noon, offering to comb out and style the hair of any resident whose family had not made other arrangements, which, as she quickly learned, was most of them. She did it for free. She did it because she had read somewhere that people who sit in nursing homes with unbrushed hair for months at a time begin to feel less like themselves, less like the women they used to be when their hair was part of how they faced the world, and she had believed that immediately because her mother in her final week in the hospital had asked Elena every day to braid her hair before the doctors came in. And Elena had understood then, at 16, what a braid could be when you were afraid. Fairview Rose was not a cruel place. It was not understaffed or poorly run. It was simply a facility with a limited budget and 6-2 residents. And the truth of a place like that was that there were only so many aides and only so many hours in a day, and the residents whose families were not paying extra for private attention tended to get the basics and not much more. Hair, Elena had learned, was almost always one of the things that fell away. Clean, yes. Combed, yes. But styled, tended, actually cared for, almost never. She had been volunteering for 3 months when she wandered down the wrong hallway one Sunday morning in search of the cleaning supply closet to refill her water bottle and had pushed open the door of room 214 by mistake. The woman in the bed had been in her 70s, Elena had guessed at the time, though she had later learned Margaret Whitfield was 76. She was small and thin in the way of someone who had once been taller and more filled out, the body narrowed by decades, and her hair was long and completely white and tangled in the particular way hair gets tangled when no one has touched it with any care for a very long time. She had been sitting up in bed holding a book that Elena could see she was not actually reading. Her eyes had lifted when the door opened, and Elena would remember the expression on her face for the rest of her life because it was not surprise or annoyance or any of the ordinary reactions you expect from a stranger walking into your private room. It was hope, immediately and then carefully folded away. The hope of a person who has been alone so long that any open door is briefly a possibility before it turns back into nothing. "I'm so sorry," Elena had said. "I'm looking for the supply closet. I took a wrong turn." "That's down the other hall, honey," Margaret had said, her voice soft and hoarse from not being used much. "Past the nurse's station." Elena should have said thank you and left. Instead, she had looked at the woman in the bed and at the tangled white hair on the pillow and at the book being held but not read, and something in her chest had simply stopped. She had set down her canvas bag. She had pulled a chair to the side of the bed. She had said, "Would it be all right if I did something with your hair?" Margaret Whitfield had stared at her for a long moment with the careful assessing eyes of someone who has learned not to accept kindness easily because kindness often comes with something attached to it. And Elena had sat very still and let herself be assessed without looking away. "Why?" Margaret had asked finally. "Because it's Sunday," Elena had said, "and on Sundays I do hair for people who want me to. And if nobody else is coming today, I thought maybe you might like it done." Margaret had been quiet for a long moment. Then she had said, in a voice that Elena understood immediately had not been used to say this particular kind of thing in a very long time, "I'd like that." "Yes, please." Elena had worked on her hair for an hour that first Sunday, gently, patiently, section by section, spraying each piece with water and coconut oil and working her fingers through the tangles with the careful slowness her mother had taught her. She had not spoken much. She had not asked questions. She had simply hummed quietly the song her mother used to hum when she was doing Elena's hair as a child. A song that was not quite a song. More a steady low sound that meant you are safe and I am here and this will not hurt if we go slowly. When she had finished, she had parted Margaret's hair down the middle and woven 2 simple braids, one on each side, and then twisted them together at the back into a soft knot held with a pin she always kept in her bag. It was the style Margaret had told her, after about 40 minutes of silence, she used to wear when she was young. Margaret had lifted her hand to touch the back of the knot. She had not said anything. After a moment, she had turned her face toward the window and Elena had seen her cheek was wet. "I'll come back next Sunday," Elena had said, standing up and gathering her things. "If that's all right with you." Margaret had nodded without turning back. That had been 22 months ago. Elena had not missed a single Sunday since. Through flu and 2 jobs and 1 very bad week in November when Mrs. Reyes had been briefly in the hospital and Elena had still walked the 3 miles to Fairview Rose because she had promised and because she understood, without anyone ever telling her, that Margaret Whitfield was sitting in that room waiting for her and that breaking the promise was not a thing she could do. She had never asked Margaret who she was. That had been important to Elena from the beginning. Whatever Margaret's life had been before room 214, whatever had brought her to a facility where no one ever came to visit her, it was not Elena's business and it was not what Elena was there for. Elena was there to do her hair and to sit with her and to hum while she worked, and across 22 months of Sundays, she had learned 100 small things about Margaret without ever once asking a direct question. She had learned that Margaret had grown up in a small town in Ohio and had moved east when she was young. She had learned that Margaret loved gardenias and had once kept a garden full of them. She had learned that Margaret used to play piano and that her favorite piece was something by Debussy that Elena had never heard of. She had learned that Margaret had a brother named Thomas who had died young and whom she still thought about every single day. She had learned that Margaret had been married once to a man named Arthur who had been, in her words, not a kind man, but not as cruel as he could have been, and that the marriage had ended badly and long ago. She had not learned whether Margaret had children, because Margaret did not talk about children, and Elena had decided early that she would follow Margaret's lead on what was said and what was kept quiet, because there were things about Elena's own mother that Elena did not talk about either, and she understood that some silences were the only way certain griefs could be carried. What Elena had learned, more than any of the specific facts, was that Margaret Whitfield was a woman of enormous careful dignity who had been left alone in a room for a very long time and who had learned to manage that aloneness the way a person manages a chronic pain, by structuring her days around it, by not letting it overwhelm her, by reading books she could not always focus on and looking out windows at birds she named quietly to herself. And she had learned that something had shifted inside Margaret the first Sunday Elena had walked into her room, and that something continued to shift, slowly, gently, every Sunday since. Margaret had started laughing again. Small laughs at first, quiet and surprised, as if she had forgotten she could. Then fuller ones. She had started telling Elena stories, unprompted, stories from when she was young. Stories about her brother Thomas and the dog they had shared and the summers they had spent at a lake somewhere in Michigan. She had started asking Elena questions about her own life, carefully, the way someone asks a question when they are not sure they still know how to ask questions without the other person pulling away. And Elena had answered them simply and honestly because she had nothing to hide and because Margaret deserved to be spoken to like a person, not like a resident. Margaret had learned about the laundromat. She had learned about Mrs. Reyes. She had learned about Elena's mother and the small photograph taped above the cot and the picture of the braid in the photograph. She had learned about the cosmetology license Elena was saving toward, and the number of months Elena was away from being able to afford it, and the name of the school Elena wanted to attend if she could, and the small dream Elena had never told anyone else of one day opening her own tiny salon somewhere in a neighborhood where women who could not afford the salon kind of coconut oil could still get their hair done by someone who treated them like their hair mattered. Margaret had listened to all of it with the focused, full attention of someone who had not been given anyone's real life to hold in a very long time. "You are building something," Margaret had said one Sunday about 8 months in. "Do you understand that? What you are building?" "I'm just saving money, Miss Margaret." "You are building something," Margaret had repeated quietly, and she had not said anything more about it, but Elena had remembered the way she said it, the particular weight under the words, as if Margaret was seeing something Elena could not quite see from her own angle. On the first Sunday of November, 22 months into their Sundays together, Elena walked the 3 miles to Fairview Rose through a cold light rain that was not quite heavy enough to be a real problem but was persistent enough to have soaked through her coat by the time she arrived. She let herself in through the side door she always used, waved at Consuela at the front desk, who had known her for over a year and no longer required her to sign in, and walked up the back stairs to the second floor because she liked the way the light came through the stairwell window on cold mornings. The hallway on the second floor was quiet. It was always quiet on Sunday mornings, the soft quiet of a place where most residents were either still in bed or down in the dining hall for the late breakfast. Elena walked past the nurse's station and nodded to Delia, the Sunday morning aide, who nodded back. She stopped at the door of room 214, which was slightly ajar the way it always was on Sunday mornings because Margaret liked to leave it open for her. She pushed it the rest of the way open and walked in with the small quiet greeting she always offered. "Morning, Miss Margaret. Sorry I'm a little wet." And then she stopped just inside the door because the bed was empty and made and someone had set a folded piece of paper on the pillow with Elena's name written across it in careful, shaky handwriting. Elena stood in the doorway for a long moment without moving. Her canvas bag hung from her shoulder. Water dripped from her coat sleeve onto the linoleum floor in a small, steady rhythm she could hear in the silence. Delia appeared behind her in the doorway. Elena had not heard her footsteps. "Elena, honey," Delia said quietly. "I'm so sorry. I should have caught you at the front. She passed on Thursday evening. It was very peaceful. She went in her sleep. The nurses found her during the nighttime check and there was no distress. Her heart just stopped. The doctor said it was exactly what a person would hope for if they had to go. Elena did not say anything. She was looking at the folded piece of paper on the pillow. She left that for you, Delia said. She wrote it on Tuesday night. She asked the night nurse to help her because her hands were shaking. She wanted to make sure it was clear. Delia paused. She asked us to make sure you got it when you came on Sunday. She was very specific about that. Elena walked slowly across the room. She set down her canvas bag on the chair she always used. She picked up the folded piece of paper and held it in her hand without opening it for a moment. Her fingers were very cold. Take your time, Delia said gently. I'll leave you alone with her things. Her personal items are already in a box at the front desk. You can take whatever of them you want. She left instructions that you were to have first choice of anything that wasn't addressed in her legal paperwork. The facility director has been trying to reach you all week, but we didn't have your number. She'll want to speak with you before you leave today. There are some things she needs to tell you. Delia squeezed her shoulder very briefly and left, closing the door softly behind her. Elena sat down in the chair by the bed. The bed was made with the hospital corners Margaret had always liked. The pillow had been fluffed and positioned neatly. The book Margaret had been reading, a collection of poems by someone named Mary Oliver, sat closed on the nightstand with a bookmark still in place. The water glass on the nightstand was empty and clean. Elena unfolded the piece of paper. The handwriting was shaky but entirely legible. The handwriting of a 76-year-old woman who had been careful about her hands her entire life and who had, even at the end, made sure the letters formed themselves clearly. My Elena, the letter began. If you are reading this, it is because I am no longer in the room with you on Sunday morning, and I am very sorry for that because our Sundays have meant more to me than I can properly explain in a letter, and I wanted you to hear me say that one more time before I left. I do not know how much time I have left when I am writing this. The doctors have been gentle with me, but I am not a fool, and I know my heart is tired. I have been carrying some things a long time that I think the tiredness comes from, and I wanted to set some of them down before I went. The first thing I want to tell you is that I am not exactly the person I have let you believe I was. I never lied to you about anything, but there are large parts of my life I did not tell you about, because in the beginning I did not trust anyone with them. And then later I trusted you completely, but I was afraid that if I told you who I had been, it would change the way you sat with me on Sunday mornings, and I could not bear the thought of that. The quiet of our Sundays was the first real thing I had been given in a very long time, and I protected it the only way I knew how, which was by not filling it with a version of me I was ashamed of. I owe you the truth now. Please forgive me for giving it to you this way instead of in person. I wanted to tell you many times, and I could not find the words when you were sitting in the chair, and by the time I realized I was running out of Sundays, my hands had already started shaking too much to say it properly out loud. My full name is Margaret Eleanor Whitfield Hargrove. I stopped using the Hargrove when I came to Fairview Rose 11 years ago because I wanted to disappear from the people who had put me here, and I thought that if I went back to my maiden name, they would not be able to find me. I was partly right about that. They did not come looking. The Hargrove name belonged to my husband, Arthur, whom you know I told you about. What I did not tell you is that Arthur Hargrove was a man who built a great deal of wealth in the middle of the last century in construction and real estate development. And when he died 23 years ago, that wealth passed to me because we had no children of our own, though he had 2 children from his first marriage who were grown before I ever met him. His children did not like me. They had never liked me. They considered me the second wife who had ended up with everything that should have been theirs. And when Arthur died, they made my life extraordinarily difficult for about 12 years in ways I will not describe here because I do not want those years to be the last thing I give you. What matters is that 11 years ago, when I was 65, I became ill for a period of about 6 months, a kidney problem that the doctors resolved but that left me weak, and during that weakness, Arthur's son, Garrett Hargrove, arranged through a lawyer of his own choosing to have me placed here at Fairview Rose under the pretext of memory care, which I did not actually need, and to take over the management of Arthur's estate under a power of attorney I signed when I was not in any condition to understand what I was signing. I have been living here 11 years. My health returned within the first year. I could have left. But by the time I understood what had been done to me, I had also understood that Garrett had very capable lawyers and that fighting him would require me to leave this facility and engage in a legal war I did not have the strength for. And I made a decision which I now know was the wrong decision, but which I made at the time because I was tired and alone and 66 years old and I did not believe the world would side with me against a Hargrove. I let him have it. I stopped responding to his lawyer's letters. I let him believe I had accepted the situation. I asked the facility to reroute my mail so that my name on the facility registry reflected only Margaret Whitfield, my maiden name, and so that I would no longer appear to be connected to the Hargrove estate. I wanted to be forgotten, because being forgotten felt like the only freedom available to a woman who was 76 years old and had no one left to fight for her. I was forgotten, Elena. For 11 years, no one came. Not Garrett. Not his sister. Not anyone. They have been running Arthur's company and living in Arthur's houses and spending Arthur's money, and I have been in this room, and for 11 years, that was simply how things were. And then you walked into my room by mistake. And you set down your bag and pulled up a chair and asked if you could do something with my hair, and I did not know what to say, because no one had touched my hair with any care in more years than I could count. And I said yes because I could not think of a reason to say no. Elena, what I need you to understand is this. You did not rescue me because you knew who I was. You did not know who I was. You rescued me because you are the kind of person who rescues people without needing to know who they are. You walked into my room every Sunday for 22 months and you did my hair and you hummed your mother's song and you never once asked me a single question about my past. You gave me the one gift no one else has given me in my entire adult life, which is the gift of being treated like a person rather than like an estate. I sat with that for a long time. I watched you every Sunday and I listened to you tell me about your mother and your laundromat and your storage room and your cosmetology license that you were 27 months away from being able to afford. And I thought to myself, Margaret, what are you doing? Margaret, you have the means to change this young woman's life with a single phone call and you are sitting here letting her walk 3 miles in the rain every Sunday to do your hair for free. I did not make the phone call, Elena, and I want to explain to you why, because I do not want you to think I was being cruel. I did not make the phone call because I did not want our Sundays to change. I was afraid that the moment I became a woman who could pay for your cosmetology license, I would stop being the woman you sat with on Sunday mornings. I was afraid that whatever quiet, real thing had grown between us would be pulled apart by the ugly machinery of money, and I had so little in my life, Elena, that I could not bear the thought of losing what we had. I was wrong to hold back, and I am so sorry. I have been writing new legal instructions for 3 weeks now, working with a lawyer I found on my own, a woman named Priscilla Vance, who has been coming to the facility in the afternoons so no one here would know what we were doing. Her card is in the nightstand drawer. I have called her one final time yesterday and everything is now in order and filed in the proper places. Elena, the Hargrove family is about to receive a very unpleasant surprise, and you are going to be in the middle of it. And I need you to understand that you did not ask for any of this and that you are not required to accept any of it. But I hope with my whole heart that you will, because every single thing I have done in the last 3 weeks I have done because I finally understood that the greatest act of my life was not anything I did in 76 years before you walked into my room. It was the moment I said yes to a stranger who asked if she could do my hair. Please call Priscilla Vance when you are ready. Take your time. Walk home first. Be gentle with yourself. I love you like you were my own, Elena, and I always will. Your Margaret. Elena finished the letter and sat very still in the chair for a long time. Outside the window, the rain had picked up into something more substantial. Down the hall, she could hear the quiet sounds of the Sunday morning facility going about its business, a food cart rolling past, a television playing somewhere at a low volume, Delia's voice speaking gently to someone at the nurse's station. She folded the letter along its original creases and held it against her chest with both hands, and she stayed that way for a long time. She did not cry. She was not yet at the crying. What she felt was something larger and more complicated than crying, something that felt like the whole room had expanded quietly around her to accommodate a truth she had not known was there but which, now that she knew, made every single one of the last 22 months look slightly different in the soft morning light. After a while, She opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside, carefully placed, was a small stack of things. A photograph she had never seen of a younger Margaret, maybe 40, standing in a garden full of gardenias with her hair in the exact two-braid twist Elena had been doing for her every Sunday. A small velvet pouch that Elena did not open yet because opening it felt like something to do later. A business card in cream-colored stock that read, Priscilla Vance, Attorney at Law, Estates and Family Trusts, with a phone number handwritten beneath the printed one. And a second folded piece of paper with Elena's name on it, smaller than the first, that simply said on the front, "For when you are ready to see what I wanted you to see." Elena left that second paper folded. She took everything else, including the book of Mary Oliver poems, and placed all of it into her canvas bag beside her combs and her water bottle and the jar of coconut oil she had brought to do Margaret's hair this morning and would not be using. She stood up from the chair. She looked at the empty bed one more time. "I'll see you, Miss Margaret," she said quietly into the room. Then she walked down the hallway to the facility director's office, where she knocked on the frame of the open door, and where the director, a woman named Catherine Dillard, looked up from her desk and saw who was standing there and said, "Oh, thank God. I have been praying you would come today." Catherine Dillard was in her 50s, tall, with the tired, competent manner of a woman who had been running a mid-size assisted living facility for 15 years and who had seen most of what human beings did to each other in the last chapters of their lives. She invited Elena in. She closed the door. She offered Elena tea and did not take offense when Elena quietly shook her head. She sat down across from her with a manila folder in her hands and a careful expression that told Elena she was about to be given information that would rearrange her afternoon. "I need to tell you some things about Margaret," Catherine said, "and I need to apologize to you in advance because some of what I am about to say is going to be difficult. And I am the person at this facility who has known the fuller picture and has been unable to share it with you until now for reasons that were not my choice. Margaret's lawyer, Priscilla Vance, called me first thing Friday morning. She will be here at this facility at 1 o'clock today to meet with you if you are able. She said Margaret specifically requested that I prepare you for that meeting, because she did not want you walking into a conference room with Ms. Vance and being ambushed by the shape of what she has left you." Elena nodded slowly. "I read her letter." "Good. That will help." Catherine opened the folder and turned it to face Elena. "Then you know that Margaret's legal name is Margaret Eleanor Whitfield Hargrove, that she was married to Arthur Hargrove of Hargrove Construction and Development, and that she has been effectively hiding in this facility for 11 years from a man named Garrett Hargrove, who is her stepson." Catherine paused. "What I need to tell you now is that Garrett Hargrove is not a small person. The Hargrove family is one of the most prominent development families on the eastern seaboard. They are worth a great deal of money. And the thing Margaret has done in the last 3 weeks has consequences that go far beyond this facility." Elena looked at the folder. She did not reach for it yet. "Miss Catherine, can I ask you something first?" "Of course." "Did Miss Margaret know she was dying?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes. The doctors had told her in September that her heart was not strong and that they could not guarantee how long it would hold. She asked them to keep it between them. She did not want anyone at the facility to know, and she did not want you to know. She said she did not want you sitting with her on Sunday mornings watching her for signs of the end. She wanted the Sundays to keep being Sundays for as long as there were Sundays." Elena nodded. Her throat was tight in a specific, careful way. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "All right. What did she do in the last 3 weeks?" Catherine Dillard took a small, slow breath. She closed the folder. She said, "She changed everything, Elena. Every single thing she could still change. And at 1 o'clock today, Priscilla Vance is going to sit across from you in our conference room and tell you exactly what that means." Outside the window of the director's office, the rain had settled into a steady cold drum against the glass, and Elena Moreno, who had walked 3 miles that morning to braid the hair of a woman in room 214, sat in a chair holding a canvas bag in her lap and waited to find out what it meant that the only woman on the second floor who had never received a visitor had, in the last 3 weeks of her life, done something that was going to echo through an entire family she had never met. Priscilla Vance arrived at Fairview Rose at 12 minutes before 1 o'clock carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a charcoal coat that she did not take off until she was seated in the conference room, because she was the kind of woman who understood that an article of clothing could be a signal to the person across the table that she was not going to rush, that she intended to be here for as long as this took, that nothing about this meeting would be treated as routine. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back into a low knot and the direct, measured eyes of someone who had spent 30 years of her professional life representing people who had been written off by their own families. Catherine Dillard introduced her to Elena in the hallway outside the conference room, and Priscilla looked at Elena for a long moment before she said anything, the way someone looks at a person they have already been thinking about for a long time without having met. "Miss Moreno," she said finally, and her voice was low and even, "I am so glad to meet you. Margaret spoke of you every single time I came to see her. I feel as though I already know you a little, though I understand you know almost nothing about me. Please come in. Take your time. There is no clock running today." The conference room at Fairview Rose was a small plain space with a long oval table and 6 chairs and a window that looked out over the facility garden, which was bare and grey in the November rain. Priscilla sat down on one side of the table and gestured for Elena to sit across from her. Catherine Dillard left them alone and closed the door. Elena set her canvas bag on the floor beside her chair and folded her hands in her lap because she did not know what else to do with them. Priscilla opened her briefcase and placed 3 documents on the table between them in a careful stack. She did not immediately begin with the documents. She looked at Elena and said, "Before I tell you anything about what Margaret has done, I want to say something to you directly. Margaret hired me 8 weeks ago, not 3 as she wrote in her letter. She had been planning this for longer than she told you she had been planning. I want you to know that because the plan you are about to hear was not a rushed decision made by a frightened woman in her last days. It was a considered, patient, carefully constructed plan made by a woman of sound mind who knew exactly what she was doing. That will matter later, when the Hargrove family's lawyers try to argue otherwise. And they will try. I want you prepared for that." Elena nodded slowly. She had not yet said a word in the conference room. "I also want to say," Priscilla continued, "that everything you are about to hear can be declined. Margaret was very specific about that. She said to me, and I am quoting her now because I wrote it down, 'I do not want this girl to feel obligated. She has already given me more than anyone has given me in 40 years. If she wants to walk away from all of it and keep only the memory of our Sundays, that is her right, and I want her to know it is her right. So I am telling you that now, before we begin. Whatever you hear in this room today, you get to decide what you do with it. That is non-negotiable." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. It was the first thing she had said to Priscilla, and her voice was smaller than she had wanted it to be. She cleared her throat gently. "What did she do?" Priscilla took a slow breath. Then she began. "When Arthur Hargrove died 23 years ago, his estate passed in full to Margaret, who was his surviving spouse, with certain distributions to his 2 adult children by his first marriage that were provided for in his will. Those distributions were substantial. Garrett Hargrove, the son, received a trust valued at approximately $18 million, and a 20% minority stake in Hargrove Construction and Development. His sister, Yvette Hargrove Bellamy, received a similar trust and a similar stake. The remaining controlling interest in the company, the 80% majority stake, along with the family holdings in real estate, stocks, bonds, and a number of smaller assets, passed to Margaret. The total value of what Margaret inherited, at the time of Arthur's death, was approximately $240 million. Priscilla paused to let that land. Elena did not move. Her face did not change. Priscilla watched her carefully for a moment and then continued. Over the following 12 years, Margaret managed that estate with the help of Arthur's longtime attorney, a man named Howard Brennan, who I will tell you more about in a moment. The estate performed well. By the time Margaret became ill 11 years ago at age 65, the estate was valued at approximately $310 million, not counting her interest in the company itself, which had continued to grow in value independently. When Garrett Hargrove arranged for her admission to this facility under the pretense of memory care, he did so after Howard Brennan had retired and been replaced by a lawyer of Garrett's choosing, a man named Lionel Arbuckle. Mr. Arbuckle is the one who presented Margaret with the power of attorney paperwork she signed while she was ill. That power of attorney gave Garrett effective control of the estate and the company for the duration of her, quote, incapacity. Priscilla's voice was steady and unadorned, the voice of a woman reading a case file she had memorized. For 11 years, Garrett Hargrove has operated the company and managed the estate under that power of attorney. He has drawn a substantial salary as chief executive. He has made significant distributions to himself and to his sister from the estate's interest earnings. He has sold certain holdings and purchased others. He has, in general, behaved as if the estate were his own. He has not, in 11 years, once visited Margaret at this facility. He has not once inquired about her health in any meaningful way. He has received quarterly reports from the facility that confirmed she was alive and in stable condition, and those reports appear to have been entirely sufficient for his purposes. Elena's hands had tightened slightly in her lap. She was listening without interrupting. Here is the important thing, Priscilla said. The power of attorney Margaret signed is a durable power of attorney for finances. It is not a guardianship. It does not transfer ownership. Margaret has remained the legal owner of the estate and the controlling shareholder of the company for all 11 years she has been at Fairview Rose. Garrett has been acting as her agent. He has not been acting as the owner. There is a legal distinction between those two things, and it is the distinction that everything we are about to discuss rests upon. Elena looked up slowly. She still owned it. She still owned it. Every dollar of it. Every share of it. Every property. Every holding. Every asset. It has all belonged to Margaret Eleanor Whitfield Hargrove the entire time. Garrett has been spending her money with her permission, which is to say, with a permission she gave while ill, which she could have revoked at any time during the 11 years she has been here, and which she did not revoke because she had made a decision to let him have it, for reasons she explained in her letter to you. Until 8 weeks ago, Elena said. Priscilla allowed the smallest possible smile. Until 8 weeks ago. Margaret contacted me through a referral from a woman in the facility dining room named Harriet Finch, whose daughter had used my services 12 years ago in a different matter. Harriet had apparently spent 3 months working up the courage to give Margaret my card, because she had suspected for years that something was wrong with Margaret's situation and had never quite known how to help. When Margaret finally called me, she said, and I am quoting her again, "I have done something very stupid for 11 years and I would like to you undo it before I run out of time. My heart is failing. The doctors have given me perhaps 6 months. There is a young woman who comes to do my hair every Sunday and she has no idea who I am. I would like to fix what I have allowed to happen, and I would like a significant portion of what I fixed to go to her, and I would like the remainder to go somewhere that would make my late husband's son very, very unhappy." Those were her exact words. I wrote them down at the time because I knew I was about to begin one of the most interesting cases of my career. Priscilla took the first document from the stack and turned it toward Elena. 3 weeks ago, Margaret formally revoked the power of attorney granted to Garrett Hargrove. The revocation was notarized, witnessed by 2 independent parties, and filed with the appropriate offices. Garrett does not yet know this has happened, because the revocation was structured to take effect upon Margaret's death, which means that as of Thursday evening, the moment her heart stopped, every single legal authority he has been operating under for 11 years ceased to exist. Elena looked at the document. It was a page of legal text with Margaret's shaky but legible signature at the bottom beside Priscilla's and 2 witness signatures. 2 weeks ago, Priscilla continued, pulling out the second document. Margaret executed a new last will and testament, which supersedes any previous will that may have been filed. This new will contains several provisions, which I am now going to walk you through. Are you ready for this part, Elena? Elena nodded once. Yes. Priscilla's eyes were very steady. The first provision directs that Margaret's 80% controlling stake in Hargrove Construction and Development, along with the entirety of the investment portfolio and real estate holdings that have accumulated under her name over the past 23 years, be dissolved into liquid form and divided as follows. 40% of the total value is to be established as a perpetual charitable foundation named the Thomas Whitfield Foundation, after her brother, to be administered by a board of independent trustees and dedicated to providing direct assistance and professional education to young women who have aged out of foster care or have otherwise been left without family support before the age of 21. The foundation is to be funded at approximately $130 million. Elena did not move. The second provision, Priscilla continued, turning a page, directs that 30% of the total value be donated in a single lump sum to a consortium of 4 organizations that Margaret identified personally. A national network of assisted living facilities serving low-income elderly residents. A scholarship fund at a cosmetology school in the city of Philadelphia that Margaret asked me to research and select on her behalf. A hospice care organization. And a program providing transitional housing for women fleeing abusive marriages. That total donation is valued at approximately $97 million. Elena's face had gone very still. She was listening the way a person listens when they understand that everything they are being told is going to be tested against them later and they must hold it exactly. The third provision, Priscilla said, which is the one you need to hear carefully, directs that the remaining 30% of the total value, along with the personal items in Margaret's room at this facility and the full contents of a small safe deposit box held under her maiden name at First Commonwealth Bank, be bequeathed in full to Miss Elena Moreno, of Suds and Such Laundromat, with the specific instruction that the funds may not be placed in any trust that would restrict Miss Moreno's access to them, and that Miss Moreno is to have complete and immediate discretion over their use, subject only to the normal legal and tax obligations that apply to any inheritance. The conference room was silent. Miss Moreno, Priscilla said, very gently, the value of that 30%, as of this morning's accounting, is approximately $97 million. Elena looked at her. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, very carefully, as if she were tasting each word, I am sorry. I think I need you to say that number again. $97 million, Elena. Margaret has left you $97 million. Outside the window of the conference room, the rain had stopped and a thin band of winter sunlight had broken through the clouds and was lying across the bare garden. Elena looked at it for a moment without really seeing it. She could feel her own hands in her lap without being entirely sure they belonged to her. She was aware that she was breathing, but she was aware of it in the way a person is aware of breathing when they have just been pulled from underwater and are remembering what air is for. She did not tell me, Elena said quietly. In 22 months, she never once said anything. She knew I was saving dollar by dollar for a license that cost $4,000. And she sat there with. She could have, Priscilla said. She chose not to, for exactly the reasons she explained in her letter. You will have to decide for yourself whether those reasons were right or wrong. I will tell you that in my professional experience, people who have been as alone as Margaret was for as long as she was tend to protect the one real thing they have with an intensity that looks strange from the outside but makes perfect sense from the inside. She was not withholding from you to test you, Elena. She was protecting the Sundays. I believe that completely. I watched her cry 3 times in our meetings because she was afraid that the moment you found out, everything that had been real between you would be retroactively complicated. She asked me 5 separate times whether you would forgive her for not telling you sooner. Elena looked down at her hands. There is nothing to forgive. That is what I told her. I do not think she quite believed me. Priscilla closed the document and folded her hands over it. There is one more thing I need to tell you, and then we can pause and you can take as much time as you need. The new will and the revocation of power of attorney are, as of this moment, not yet known to Garrett Hargrove or to his sister Yvette or to their attorney Lion Larbuckle. Margaret asked me specifically to not inform them until you and I had met and until you had agreed to accept the terms of the will. She did not want you to be drawn into the confrontation with the Hargrove family before you had a chance to decide whether you wanted to be in it at all. What happens when they find out? Priscilla's expression did not change, but something settled in her eyes that had the quality of a woman who had been through this kind of moment many times before and had stopped being surprised by it. They are going to be very angry, Elena. They are going to hire the most expensive attorneys they can find. They are going to argue that Margaret was not of sound mind when she signed the new will. They are going to argue that I unduly influenced her, or that you did, or that Catherine Dillard did, or that all 3 of us did in some sort of conspiracy. They are going to attempt to have the will thrown out and the estate returned to the distribution that existed under the previous will, which was a will Lionel Arbuckle drafted 6 years ago and which Margaret signed during another period of illness, and which leaves the overwhelming majority of the estate to Garrett and Yvette. Priscilla paused. They will not win, Elena. I want you to hear me say that clearly. I have prepared this case for 8 weeks. The new will is witnessed by 2 independent parties, one of whom is a retired judge. Margaret underwent 3 separate capacity evaluations in the weeks leading up to the signing, all of which found her fully competent. The revocation of power of attorney is procedurally airtight. The new will is procedurally airtight. Everything Margaret did, she did correctly. The Hargroves will spend a great deal of money and make a great deal of noise, and in the end they will not prevail, because Margaret Eleanor Whitfield Hargrove was a woman of completely sound mind who made every decision deliberately, and I have the documentation to prove it 10 times over. Elena was quiet for a long time. Priscilla did not fill the silence. She let it sit. Finally Elena said, "Miss Vance, can I ask you something? Please." Why did she want the 30% in liquid form with no trust? Why not structure it so I couldn't do anything foolish with it? She must have known I don't know the first thing about handling this kind of money. Priscilla's expression softened slightly, and for the first time since she had walked into the room, something close to personal warmth crossed her face. She said to me, and I am quoting her again because I wrote this one down too, "Priscilla, I have watched that girl walk 3 miles in the rain every Sunday for 22 months to do my hair for free. I have watched her refuse to ask me a single question about who I was for 22 months because she was not willing to treat me like an opportunity. If there is a single person on this earth I trust to make decisions with a large sum of money, it is her. I do not want to protect her from her own judgment. I want her to have every dollar unencumbered, because I believe she will do things with it that no trustee I could hire would ever think to do." Priscilla looked at Elena steadily. She was not being reckless, Elena. She was being certain. She believed in you completely. I would suggest, as a legal matter, that you retain me or another experienced attorney to advise you on the mechanics of receiving and managing this inheritance. There are tax implications and procedural matters that require expertise. But she did not want anyone to control your money. She wanted you to own it, completely and without qualification. Elena was quiet for another long moment. Then she said, "I accept." Priscilla looked at her. "Elena, I want you to take some time before you formally sign the acceptance papers. There is no rush. The will is filed. The estate is secured. You do not have to decide today." "I accept," Elena said again, and her voice was steadier this time. "I don't need to take time." Miss Margaret thought about this for 8 weeks. She earned the right to my yes on the first day I heard about it. I am not going to make her wait any longer than she already waited. Priscilla looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, and opened her briefcase and removed a folder of formal acceptance documents, and Elena Moreno, who that morning had walked 3 miles in the rain to braid the hair of a woman in room 214 and owned less than $800 in the world, signed her name at the bottom of a page that made her the beneficiary of $97 million, and she did it without her hand shaking once, because she had decided the moment. Priscilla said Margaret's exact words that she was going to be worthy of what Margaret had seen in her, and she was going to start by not flinching. If you are hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The first confrontation came 4 days later. Priscilla had been careful about the sequence. On Monday morning she had filed the new will with the probate court. On Monday afternoon she had sent formal notifications to Lionel Arbuckle, Garrett Hargrove, and Yvette Hargrove Bellamy informing them of Margaret's death, the revocation of the power of attorney, and the existence of the new will, with copies of the relevant documents attached. She had deliberately not answered her phone on Monday evening or Tuesday morning. She had instructed Elena to stay at the laundromat and to not answer her own phone if any number she did not recognize called. She had told Mrs. Reyes to screen any visitors to the laundromat carefully. On Wednesday afternoon, Garrett Hargrove walked into Suds and Such. Elena was folding a stack of hotel towels in the back when Mrs. Reyes came through the swinging door with an expression Elena had not seen on her face in 2 years of working together. Mrs. Reyes was a woman who had survived a bad marriage, a daughter's death, and 41 years running a small business in a neighborhood that had gone through 3 difficult decades, and she did not startle easily. Her eyes now had the particular readiness of a woman preparing to defend her territory. "There is a man in the front," Mrs. Reyes said quietly. He says his name is Garrett Hargrove. He says he is here to speak with you. I told him you were busy. He said he would wait. Elena, Mija, that man has a face that worries me. Do you want me to call Miss Vance? Elena set down the towels. She looked at Mrs. Reyes for a moment, and she thought about what Miss Margaret would have done, and she thought about what her own mother would have done, and she thought about the fact that she was 19 years old and had never in her life had a conversation with a man who had just been told he was no longer in control of a $310 million estate. Call Miss Vance, Elena said. Tell her Garrett is here. Ask her what she wants me to do. While you are calling her, I am going to go out there and say hello, because I am not going to let him stand in the front of the laundromat scaring your customers. Mrs. Reyes looked at her carefully. Elena, you do not have to talk to him. I know, but I am not going to hide from him either. If I hide from him this first time, I will be hiding from him for the rest of my life. Miss Margaret did not give me this to hide from it. Make the call. I will be fine. Mrs. Reyes pressed her lips together. Then she nodded once and went back through the swinging door toward the office phone. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, took it off, hung it on the peg by the door, and walked out into the front of the laundromat. Garrett Hargrove was standing near the coin machine with his hands in the pockets of a wool coat that had cost more than Elena had earned in the last 3 months. He was in his late 50s, tall and trim, with silver at his temples and the precise grooming of a man who spent money on the details of his appearance. His face, as Mrs. Reyes had said, was a face with something worrying in it. Not overtly cruel. Not angry. Something colder than either. The face of a man who had arrived at this laundromat having already decided what was going to happen during his visit and was now waiting for the props in the scene, including Elena, to assume their assigned positions. He looked up as Elena came through the swinging door. His eyes moved over her once. She watched his calculation happen in real time. He was registering her age, her clothes, her shoes, the fact that she was wearing no makeup and had her hair pulled back in a simple bun, and he was filing it all into whatever conclusion he had prepared for himself before arriving. The conclusion, Elena could see plainly, was that she was not going to be a serious obstacle. Miss Moreno, he said, and his voice was smooth and warm in the particular way that men's voices become smooth and warm when they are setting out to manage a woman they have already decided is not worth taking seriously. Thank you for coming out. I was hoping we could speak privately. Is there somewhere we could sit? We can speak here, Elena said. Mrs. Reyes's laundromat is a public place and I am comfortable here. What is it that you would like to say to me, Mr. Hargrove? Something moved briefly behind his eyes. The first calculation adjusting. He had expected her to walk out into the parking lot with him, or to offer him the back room. He had expected her to make herself accommodating before he had even asked. Her not doing so was a data point he was processing. Of course, he said smoothly. Here is fine. I want to start by saying that I am very sorry for your loss. I understand you knew my stepmother well, and that her passing has been difficult. I came here personally, rather than sending a lawyer, because I wanted you to know that I take this situation seriously and that I want to resolve it in a way that is fair to everyone involved, especially to you. Elena looked at him and did not answer. She had learned, from 2 years of listening more than she spoke, that men who came to manage women often filled silences on their own if you simply let them. I am sure, he continued, that you have been told a great deal of information over the last several days that must have been overwhelming. I am also sure that the lawyer my stepmother engaged has presented the situation to you in a way that is favorable to her client, which is, of course, her professional obligation. I am not here to criticize Ms. Vance. I am here to explain to you what I believe the full picture actually is, and to offer you a way forward that will spare you a great deal of difficulty. Elena said, Please continue, Mr. Hargrove. My stepmother was a kind woman, Miss Moreno. She was also, for the last 11 years, a woman in significant cognitive decline. That is why she was placed at Fairview Rose to begin with. The memory care wing. The facility's records will confirm this. What you experienced as your friendship with her, and I do not doubt that it was a real and important friendship from your perspective, was a friendship with a woman whose judgment was compromised by her condition. That is not a criticism of her. It is simply a medical fact. Elena had learned, from Priscilla Vance in the conference room, that Margaret had never been placed in the memory care wing, that the memory care pretext had been used for admission but had been quietly corrected within the first year, and that Margaret had for 11 years lived in standard residential care with full cognitive function and 3 recent capacity evaluations to prove it. She also understood, instinctively, that Garrett Hargrove did not know she knew these things. She let him keep talking. The will that my stepmother signed 2 weeks ago, Garrett continued, was signed during a period of considerable physical decline, under the influence of a young woman who had been spending private time with her every week for nearly 2 years without supervision, and with the assistance of a lawyer who had not previously represented her and who was engaged specifically for the purpose of drafting this document. I want to be clear that I am not accusing you of anything, Miss Moreno. I believe you are, in your own way, a well-meaning young person who found herself in a situation that was more complicated than you realized. I believe my stepmother became emotionally dependent on you, as lonely elderly people often do on their caregivers, and I believe she made decisions in her final weeks that do not reflect the wishes she would have expressed in a healthier state. He paused, and Elena could feel him shifting into the part of the prepared speech that mattered most to him. My sister and I are prepared to settle this matter without a public dispute. We are prepared to offer you $500,000 in exchange for your agreement to waive your claim under the new will and to allow the previous will, which my stepmother signed 6 years ago and which my family has always understood to represent her true wishes, to govern the distribution of the estate. $500,000 is a significant amount of money, Miss Moreno. It is a life-changing amount of money for someone in your circumstances. It is also a very generous offer from a family that has no legal obligation to offer you anything, given that we believe the new will is not valid. We are making the offer in the spirit of honoring the friendship you had with my stepmother, and in the spirit of avoiding a lengthy legal dispute that would be costly and emotionally difficult for everyone involved, including you. He paused again, watching her face. I would encourage you to think very carefully about this offer, Miss Moreno. I would also encourage you to think about the fact that any legal dispute will require you to testify in open court about your relationship with my stepmother, about the nature of your visits to her private room over 2 years, about your personal financial situation, and about a number of other matters that will become part of the public record. The press has already expressed interest in this story. I would hate for a young woman like yourself to have her private life examined in that way, particularly when a cleaner resolution is available. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She was 19 years old. She had been standing in front of this man for perhaps 4 minutes. And in those 4 minutes, she had heard him call her well-meaning in a tone that meant stupid, call Margaret's friendship emotional dependency in a tone that meant manipulation, and offer her $500,000 wrapped in the polite and specific threat of public humiliation if she did not take it. She understood something, quietly, about the architecture of what had been done to Margaret for 11 years. She understood it not from what Garrett said, but from how he said it. She understood that this was not a man performing for the occasion. This was simply how he spoke. This was how he had spoken to an ill 65-year-old woman when he had handed her a power of attorney paperwork. She was sure of it, with the same smooth warmth and the same careful threats buried under reasonable language. This was how he had operated for decades. This was the voice of a man who had been getting what he wanted from women his entire life by making them feel that resistance would be embarrassing for them. Elena took a slow breath. Mr. Hargrove, she said, I want to thank you for coming here in person. I am going to answer you directly, because I think that is the respect you have actually earned today, and I do not want to waste your time or mine. Garrett's expression did not change, but something in his posture did. A small adjustment. The calculation shifting again. I do not accept your offer, Elena said. I am not going to accept any offer. I do not want $500,000, Mr. Hargrove. I do not want your money, and that is not because I do not know what money is worth. I know exactly what money is worth. I have lived on less than $300 a week for 2 years. I know what every dollar is for. What I am telling you is that Miss Margaret did not leave me what she left me because she was confused or because she was dependent on me. She left me what she left me because she knew exactly what she was doing, and I am not going to disrespect her memory by pretending otherwise to make your life easier. Garrett's eyes had narrowed slightly. I am also going to tell you, Elena continued, because I think you should know this before you leave, that I will be going forward with the terms of the new will exactly as Miss Margaret wrote them. I will be establishing the Thomas Whitfield Foundation. I will be donating the 30% to the 4 organizations she chose. I will be accepting the 30% she left to me personally, and I will be using it to do things I have not yet decided on but which I promise you I will choose carefully, because she trusted me to choose carefully and I intend to be worthy of that trust. I will not be settling. I will not be negotiating. I will not be accepting any offer from any member of your family, now or in the future. And Mr. Hargrove. She looked at him directly, without flinching. If you threaten me with the press one more time, in this laundromat or anywhere else, I will ask Miss Vance to release every single document she has regarding the 11 years you spent pretending my friend had dementia so that you could spend her money while she sat in a room by herself, and I will let the press have all of it. I will not do that if you leave us alone. I will absolutely do it if you do not. Do we understand each other? The laundromat was very quiet. A dryer in the corner had finished its cycle and stopped, and the small electronic beep it was making was the only sound in the room. Garrett Hargrove stood very still for a long moment. Whatever had been in his face when he walked in had been replaced by something else. Not quite anger. The more specific expression of a man who had walked into a situation expecting to manage a frightened teenager and had instead been spoken to by a woman who, he was now realizing, had been paying attention to every word he said and understood exactly what kind of man he was. You are making a mistake, Miss Moreno, he said finally, and his voice had lost the smooth warmth. It was flatter now, thinner. You do not understand what you are walking into. I understand it completely, Elena said. You are the one who does not. Please leave now. Mrs. Reyes does not allow men who frighten her customers to stay in her laundromat. I am asking you as a courtesy before she asks you herself. Garrett Hargrove looked at her for a moment longer. Then he turned, buttoned his coat with a sharp, precise motion, and walked out of Suds and Such, the bell above the door ringing once sharply as it closed behind him. Elena stood in the middle of the laundromat for perhaps 10 seconds. Then her legs went slightly soft under her, the way legs go when adrenaline you did not realize you were running on starts to leave your body, and she sat down on the bench beside the coin machine and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed, carefully, in and out, until her pulse stopped being loud in her ears. Mrs. Reyes came out of the back room. She had been standing just on the other side of the swinging door the entire time. She had the office phone in her hand, with Priscilla Vance on the line, and she walked over to Elena and sat down beside her on the bench and put one arm around her shoulders and said into the phone, "She is all right. She handled it. You should have heard her, Miss Vance." She spoke to him like she was 60 years old. Elena could hear Priscilla's voice faintly on the other end of the line. Priscilla was laughing, softly and with relief, and she was saying something that sounded like, "Oh, Margaret. You absolutely knew what you were doing." 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday afternoon, Priscilla called Elena at the laundromat and asked her to come down to her office for a meeting that she said required Elena to be present in person. Elena took the bus downtown, walked the 4 blocks to Priscilla's building, and rode the elevator to the 12th floor, where Priscilla's assistant, a young man named Daniel, waved her through to the conference room with a quiet smile that was less like the smile of an assistant and more like the smile of a person who had been quietly rooting for her for weeks from a distance. In the conference room, Priscilla was already seated at the long table. Beside her sat a woman Elena had never seen before, an older black woman with close-cropped gray hair and the composed bearing of a judge, which, Elena would learn in a moment, was exactly what she was. "Elena," Priscilla said, "I want you to meet the Honorable Patricia Holloway, retired." Judge Holloway was one of the 2 witnesses to Margaret's signing of the new will. She has been a friend of mine for 30 years, and she agreed to serve as a witness because the significance of Margaret's decisions required witnesses of unimpeachable character. Judge Holloway has been following the case since the filing, and she has asked to be present today because of what is going to happen in this meeting. Elena sat down across from them. She was not yet afraid, because after the laundromat confrontation with Garrett, she had stopped being afraid of meetings in rooms. She was, however, alert, because Priscilla's expression had the particular focused calm of a woman preparing to deliver important news. "Elena," Priscilla said, "Garrett Hargrove and Yvette Hargrove Bellamy filed a formal challenge to the new will 2 weeks ago, as expected. Their lawyer Lionel Arbuckle filed on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity, as expected. What I did not fully expect was that within 72 hours of that filing, I received 3 separate phone calls from 3 separate people who had read about the case in the legal filings, and who wanted to share information about the Hargrove family that they had been carrying privately for a long time. Priscilla opened a folder. The first call was from Howard Brennan, the Hargrove family's original attorney, who retired 11 years ago. Mr. Brennan is 79 years old and in good health. He said that when he read about Margaret's new will in the legal news, he recognized it immediately for what it was, and he called me to say that he had been, quote, waiting 11 years for someone to ask him what he knew. Priscilla looked at Elena steadily. Mr. Brennan is prepared to testify that Garrett Hargrove approached him in the spring of 2014, 6 months before Margaret's illness, and asked him detailed questions about the procedures by which power of attorney could be established over an elderly family member whose cognitive function was declining. Mr. Brennan said the conversation made him so uncomfortable that he declined to continue representing the family and retired 8 weeks later, citing personal reasons, though the actual reason was that he no longer wished to be professionally associated with what he believed Garrett was planning. Elena's hands had gone very still on the table. The second call, Priscilla said, was from a woman named Harriet Finch, whom you will remember was the resident at Fairview Rose who eventually gave Margaret my card. Harriet wanted to tell me that she had been at Fairview Rose for 14 years, for years longer than Margaret, and that she had personally witnessed 2 separate occasions when men she now knew to have been employed by Garrett Hargrove had visited the facility and spoken with staff about Margaret's condition, asking in particular whether any improvement in her cognitive function had been observed. The second of these visits occurred in the year Margaret's health returned to normal. Harriet believes those visits were attempts to confirm that Margaret's recovery had not become a problem for Garrett's arrangement, and she has been willing to speak with me for the last 3 weeks and has signed a formal statement to that effect. Priscilla closed the folder. The third call, Elena, was from a woman named Deborah Hargrove. She is Garrett's ex-wife. They divorced 9 years ago. She called me because she had been reading the case and because she said she had something she thought I should know about. Priscilla looked at Elena with the kind of steadiness that was preparing her for something significant. Deborah Hargrove has in her possession a series of emails between Garrett and Lionel Arbuckle from 2014 and 2015, which she retained from a shared family computer during the divorce proceedings, and which she has never used until now. Those emails, Elena, contain extremely specific discussions about how to structure Margaret's placement at Fairview Rose and the power of attorney documentation in such a way that, quote, she will not be in a position to reverse it even if her health improves. Those emails are, in the legal opinion of myself and Judge Holloway, sufficient to establish that the original power of attorney was obtained through fraud, and that the entire 11-year arrangement under which Garrett has been managing Margaret's estate is void from its inception. Priscilla paused. Elena, this has stopped being a probate case. This is now a case of elder financial abuse that has been ongoing for 11 years. Judge Holloway has been in contact with the district attorney's office. They will be opening a formal criminal investigation this week. And Garrett Hargrove, who walked into your laundromat 3 weeks ago and offered you $500,000 to go away, is about to have his life examined in ways he has not begun to prepare for. Judge Holloway spoke for the first time. Her voice was low and measured, and it had the specific weight of a woman who had spent 35 years on a bench listening to men like Garrett Hargrove explain themselves to her. Miss Moreno, she said, I sat in that conference room at Fairview Rose when your friend signed her new will. I watched her sign it. I spoke with her for 40 minutes before the signing and for 20 minutes afterward. She was one of the most lucid, clear-eyed people I have ever had the privilege of witnessing a legal document with. She told me about you. She told me the story of the first Sunday. She told me that she had spent 11 years being invisible to the world, and that you had walked into her room and seen her, and that she was going to make sure every person who had ever looked away from her understood exactly what it had cost them. Judge Holloway looked at Elena directly. She said to me, and I want you to hear this in her exact words, Patricia, I am not doing this for revenge. I am doing this because a young woman in my room spent 2 years treating me like a person when my stepson spent 11 years treating me like a checking account, and I want the record to reflect the difference. She wanted the record to reflect the difference, Miss Moreno. I am here to tell you that the record is about to reflect the difference, very loudly, very publicly, and very permanently. Elena looked at the two women across the table from her. Outside the window of the 12th floor conference room, a pale winter sun was lying across the rooftops of the city, and somewhere 3 miles away at the back of a laundromat on a quiet side street, there was a storage room with a cot and a small lamp and a picture of her mother taped to the wall beside the bed, and somewhere at Fairview Rose assisted living facility, there was an empty bed in room 214 that had been made up with hospital corners by an aide who did not yet know that the woman who had slept in that bed for 11 years was about to rearrange an entire family from beyond her grave. "All right," Elena said quietly. "What do you need me to do?" The criminal investigation moved quickly once it began, because Priscilla had spent 8 weeks building a case that was essentially already complete, and because Deborah Hargrove's emails, when they were handed over to the district attorney's office, were as damning as Priscilla had said they would be. Garrett Hargrove was formally charged with elder financial abuse, fraud, and conspiracy within 6 weeks of Margaret's death. Lyon Larbuckle, the attorney who had drafted the original power of attorney and the previous will, was charged as a co-conspirator and disbarred within the year. Yvette Hargrove Bellamy, who had benefited from the arrangement without orchestrating it, was not criminally charged but was named in the civil recovery action and agreed, through her own attorneys, to return every dollar she had received from the estate over the preceding 11 years rather than face a public trial. Garrett did not agree to return anything. He fought the charges for 14 months. He hired 3 successive law firms. He gave one interview to a local business publication in which he referred to Margaret as, quote, a woman whose final decisions were influenced by a young caregiver with questionable motives, and the morning that interview ran, Priscilla filed a defamation suit on Elena's behalf that was settled within 3 weeks for a sum Elena never asked the exact amount of and which went directly to the Thomas Whitfield Foundation. Garrett was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. He served 4. He did not speak publicly about Margaret again. Elena did not attend the sentencing. Priscilla had offered to bring her, had told her it would be her right as a party to the civil action, and Elena had thought about it for a long evening sitting at the laundromat with Mrs. Reyes drinking tea, and had decided no. She told Priscilla, Miss Margaret did not do any of this to watch him be punished. She did it to make the record reflect the difference. The record reflects the difference now. I do not need to sit in a courtroom to confirm it. Priscilla had looked at her and said, You understand her better than anyone I have ever represented has understood the person who left them a legacy, Elena. You really do. What Elena did instead, on the morning of the sentencing, was open the second folded piece of paper from the nightstand drawer. She had kept it in the same small box on the milk crate beside her cot for 14 months, sealed and unread, waiting for the moment Margaret had intended it for. The front had said, For when you are ready to see what I wanted you to see, and Elena had understood, somehow, that readiness did not mean healing or arrival or the conclusion of anything. It meant the quieter moment after. The moment when the storm had passed and there was space again to hear a soft voice. The letter was short. My Elena. If you are reading this, then the legal part is over and you have found a moment of stillness. I want to tell you what I wanted you to see. In the velvet pouch in the nightstand drawer, there is a small silver locket that my brother Thomas gave me on my 16th birthday. Inside it is a photograph of him. He died when he was 19 years old, which is the age you are now. He was the kindest person I have ever known, and for 60 years I have carried him inside that locket because I could not bear to put him down. I want you to have it now. Not to carry Thomas, he is mine, but because I want you to know that when I looked at you every Sunday for 22 months, what I saw was the same quality I saw in him. The quality of being kind without calculation. You have it the way he had it. There is no higher thing I could say about a person. You're Margaret. Elena opened the velvet pouch. She took out the silver locket. She held it in her palm for a long time. She did not open it. She closed her hand around it gently and held it against her chest the way she had held the first letter 14 months earlier in room 214. Then she stood up, put the locket in her pocket, and went to work. The Thomas Whitfield Foundation launched its first cohort of scholarship recipients 18 months after Margaret's death. Priscilla chaired the board for the first 2 years, with Judge Patricia Holloway and a small council of women Elena had hand-selected serving alongside her. Elena was on the board as well, in a seat reserved for her in the Foundation's charter, though she declined the chair because she did not yet feel that she had earned the right to lead something that significant. She told Priscilla, "Give me 10 years. If I am ready then, I will take it. If I am not, we will find someone who is." Priscilla had laughed and said Margaret had predicted those exact words. The foundation funded cosmetology licenses, nursing programs, teaching credentials, and trade certifications for young women who had aged out of foster care or had otherwise been left without family support before the age of 21. In its first 5 years it sent 412 young women to school. By its 10th year that number was past 3,000. Elena Moreno opened a small salon on a quiet side street 8 blocks from Mrs. Reyes's laundromat 22 months after Margaret's death. She named it Sunday Morning. The sign above the door was hand-painted in a warm soft gray by a woman who had been one of the foundation's first scholarship recipients and was now a muralist. The salon was small, 6 chairs, good light, a pot of coffee always on. Elena hired 4 stylists in the first year, all of them women who had struggled to get into the industry for the usual reasons, and she paid them a living wage that was almost unheard of in a neighborhood salon. She charged customers on a sliding scale that she did not advertise but simply applied at her own discretion. Women who could pay paid. Women who could not paid what they could, or nothing, and were never made to feel the difference. Every Sunday morning from 10 until 2, the salon was closed to the public and Elena went to Fairview Rose with her canvas bag and her combs and her jar of coconut oil, and she did the hair of whichever residents had signed up on the activity room list, and she never once charged the facility $1. Because Sundays were Sundays and Margaret had taught her what Sundays were for. She did not spend the money foolishly. She did not spend the money much at all, truthfully. Priscilla helped her establish a careful structure. A modest monthly allowance for her own living expenses that was perhaps 3 times what she had been making at the laundromat and no more. A home she purchased outright. A small 2-bedroom on a street with trees, nothing ostentatious. A reliable car. A salary for Mrs. Reyes that allowed her to retire from the laundromat at 6 to 5 instead of 7 to 5, which Mrs. Reyes had initially refused and finally accepted when Elena said, "Please, I am asking you as a daughter would ask." The rest, the vast overwhelming rest of it, went quietly into investments and into the ongoing work of the foundation's endowment, where Elena had insisted a significant additional donation from her personal share be held for expansion in years when other funding was thin. She did not become famous. She did not want to be. She gave one interview, to a small local paper in her neighborhood, 18 months after the sentencing, and when the reporter asked her what she would tell other young women who were in the situation she had been in when she met Margaret, she thought about it for a long moment and said, "I would tell them that you do not do kindness in order to be rewarded for it. You do kindness because it is the only thing you have that belongs to you completely, and nobody can take it from you, not landlords and not jobs and not the loss of people you love. It is the one thing that stays yours." I did not know Miss Margaret was wealthy. I did not know anything about her except that she was alone and her hair was tangled. If I had known, I hope I would have done the same thing. But I am grateful that I did not know, because it means I get to be sure. I get to be sure I was there on the Sundays because of her, not because of what she had. Everyone who hears this story should know that part. That is the only part that matters to me. The reporter had asked her one more question. He had asked her what she would say to Margaret, if she could say one more thing. Elena had looked at her hands for a moment. Then she had said, "I would say thank you for letting me in the room. I would say that I know she worried about what it would mean if I found out who she was, and I want her to know it did not change anything. She was the same woman in the bed. I was the same girl in the chair. Whatever she thought money would do to us, it did not do. We were real, Miss Margaret. We were always real. I hope wherever she is, she knows that." She did not mention the locket. She kept the locket for herself. It sat on the small dresser in her bedroom, beside the photograph of her own mother with the thick braid Elena had done at 7 years old, and every Sunday morning before she walked to Fairview Rose, Elena pressed her palm gently to both of them, the way Margaret had pressed her palm gently to Thomas all those years. The way people have always pressed small silent gestures to the things they do not want to put down. On a Sunday morning in October, 11 years after Margaret died, Elena walked through the doors of Fairview Rose assisted living facility carrying her canvas bag. She was 30 years old now. Her hair was longer than it had been, pulled back in a braid she had done herself that morning the way her mother had taught her when she was 7. She waved at the new receptionist, who knew her, and walked up the back stairs because she still liked the way the light came through the stairwell window. The second floor was the same as it had always been. The quiet Sunday morning quiet. The soft sounds of a place that held people gently at the end of their lives. Elena walked past the nurse's station and nodded at the weekend aide and continued down the hall, past room 212 and room 213 and room 214. She always paused at room 214. Someone else lived there now, a man in his 80s with 2 daughters who visited every week, which was exactly as it should be. Elena never went in. She just put her hand briefly on the doorframe as she passed, the way people touch the tombstones of those they have loved, and she kept walking. At the end of the hall was room 220, where a woman named Ruby Alvarez, 81 years old, had been living for 6 months. Ruby had no visitors. Ruby had long white hair that had been tangled the first Sunday Elena had met her, and which Elena had been tending now for 23 Sundays. Ruby looked up from her book when Elena came through the door and smiled the slow, careful smile of a woman who had learned, over a long life, not to waste smiles on people who did not deserve them. "Morning, Miss Ruby," Elena said. She set down her canvas bag. She pulled a chair to the side of the bed. She said, "Would it be all right if I did something with your hair today?" "I'd like that," Ruby said softly. "Yes, please." Elena opened her bag. She took out the combs and the spray bottle and the jar of coconut oil, the good kind now, because she could afford it and because she believed the women she tended deserved it, and she began humming the low soft song her mother had hummed and that she had hummed over Margaret's hair every Sunday for 22 months. A song that was not quite a song. That meant "You are safe and I am here and this will not hurt if we go slowly." Outside the window, the October sky had opened the way October skies sometimes do, wide and clear and pale blue. Somewhere 3 miles away, a salon called Sunday Morning was closed for the day, with 4 chairs waiting to be filled on Monday and a pot of coffee ready to be brewed. Somewhere on a dresser in a small house on a street with trees, a silver locket sat beside a photograph of a woman with a braid, and both of them waited patiently for Elena to come home. Margaret Whitfield spent 11 years in a room by herself and believed, at the end, that being forgotten was the only freedom she had left. And then a girl walked into her room by mistake and did not ask who she was, and that one small Sunday morning began a chain of events that rearranged an entire family, funded a foundation that changed thousands of lives, and gave a woman who thought she had been written off completely the quiet human dignity of being seen as a person one more time before she went. Elena did not do kindness for a reward. She did kindness because it was hers to do. And sometimes, when you give someone the one thing they need without ever asking what is in it for you, the world arranges itself quietly around that gesture and makes it larger than you ever intended. One Sunday morning. One tangled length of hair. One chair beside one bed. That was all it took. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.